Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the American press corps have been giving Boris Johnson a roasting at his joint press conference with the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, accusing him of telling outright lies in the past. Mr. Johnson's response, it was all a very long time ago, and there are now major world issues to be sorted out. As for Mr. Kerry, he ruled out any special treatment for Britain in terms of a post-Brexit trade deal. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has this report.
The US Secretary of State John Kerry's visit to London, a first chance for Theresa May to show that Britain, post the Brexit vote, isn't closing its door on the world. Only a week ago, Secretary Kerry thought he'd be meeting David Cameron here. It's all happened rather quickly, Theresa May said.
It happened rather quickly.
Britain, for now, still convening a meeting of EU foreign ministers to discuss Syria with the US Secretary of State. Boris Johnson suggested Britain could still have input into EU foreign affairs decisions after leaving the EU. It's not clear EU members are up for that. One senior Whitehall source said that Prime Minister Theresa May had underestimated the dismay and astonishment amongst Britain's allies when they heard that Boris Johnson was the new Foreign Secretary. They, the source said, had read the caustic remarks he'd made about world leaders in his journalism. They'd read what they felt were deceptions that the Vote Leave campaign ran, including the idea that Turkey was about to join the EU and millions of its people were about to come to Britain's borders. And they felt that the Brexit campaign leaders had melted away the moment the top job in Britain became available and hadn't had a plan ready for Brexit. At his press conference with the US Secretary of State, the US media gave Boris Johnson a taste of their scepticism.
You've accused the current U.S. President Barack Obama of harboring a part Kenyan's, quote, ancestral dislike for the British Empire, unquote, while claiming, I think untruthfully at the time, that he didn't want a Churchill bust in the White House. You've described a possible future U.S. President Hillary Clinton as someone with, quote, dyed blonde hair and pouty lips and a steely blue stare, like a sadistic nurse in a mental hospital, unquote. You've also likened her to Lady Macbeth. Do you take these comments back?
I'm afraid that there is such a rich thesaurus now of things that I've said that have been, one way or another, through what alchemy I do not know, somehow misconstrued, that it would really take me too long to engage in a full global itinerary of apology to all concerned.
You have an unusually long history of wild exaggerations and, frankly, outright lies that I think few foreign secretaries.
Was John Kerry pained or thinking, serve you right?
And I'm just wondering how Mr. Kerry and others should believe what you say, considering this very, very long history. And Mr. Kerry,
I appreciate the First Amendment in your right to free speech, but I think we need chapter and verse on this stuff. Sorry.
Go ahead. This is what you would do if you were in my place.
I'm sorry. Look, I mean, let me just repeat my point, which is that I think people are more than welcome to rake over stuff I've written over many, many years, but I think the most important thing is to get on with the very heavy agenda we have before us today.
That's the Boris Johnson that I intend to...
When John Kerry praised Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary tried to hush him up.
Stop that. That's fine. That's great. Thank you.
It's called diplomacy.
That's fantastic. It's going well. It's going well, John. Thank you very much. I think we got through that one all right.
Well, good morning, everybody.
At her first cabinet, Theresa May repeated her warning to ministers that politics was not a game.
When I launched my leadership campaign, I said that politics is not a game. The decisions that we take around this table affect people's day-to-day lives.
She said Brexit was not the government's sole purpose.
We won't be a government that's defined just by Brexit. We will also be a government defined by the social reform that we undertake.
Tomorrow, as will often happen, the agenda's yanked back to Europe as Mrs May makes her first overseas visit as Prime Minister to Berlin to meet Chancellor Merkel and do her best to answer her questions. What relationship does Britain want with the EU? And when are you leaving?
And just briefly, very important information about Syria. Humanitarian activists have claimed that up to 200 civilians have been killed in Syria in what are believed to be US-led coalition airstrikes in the country's north. Most of the deaths are thought to have been in the Islamic State group-controlled village of Al-Taqaa to the north of the strategically important city of Manbij. It has been a stronghold for the group until a Kurdish-led offensive began there in May, and its capture from IS militants would sever an important supply route from Aleppo to Raqqa. US defense officials told Channel 4 News that they are looking into these reports. Well, now we're joined by Asa Hutchinson, now governor of Arkansas and a former undersecretary at the Department of Homeland Security under President George W. Bush, and rather an invaluable character here today, it must be said, Governor, because we are not exactly abounding in foreign policy expertise. I'm just wondering, given all the world's problems, is President Trump, if it comes to that, the right man to resolve them?
Well, I think the world community should have some confidence in President Trump. First of all, he's an international business person. He understands trade and commerce, and that's significant. Secondly, he appreciates the UK, our European allies, and understands that even though we want to have a very tough trade policy in the United States, we are still built on commerce. And then finally, I think you can have confidence that he will be a good partner in fighting ISIS and fighting global terrorism. He will call it that. He will be aggressive in that, but he also looked for partners in it.
But, you know, we've only learned a very few foreign policy facts from him. He made one speech back April 27th, and he said we're going to pull out of NATO. That is, the US pull out of NATO. I mean, just as we've got this Turkish crisis, that wouldn't feel terribly comfortable.
Right, but I want you to think, though, about the Republican framework for leadership. And a Donald Trump presidency would surround himself with seasoned political veterans
like you?
In terms of foreign policy. And so have some confidence. Traditionally, the Republican leadership has brought strong allies, relationships there, have been very aggressive in the U.S. defense posture. And I would expect that under a Trump presidency. You're right.
Well, let me pause you there, though, because, I mean, we have an ongoing crisis in Turkey, a member of NATO, keen member. What would he be saying to the Turks right now?
Well, first of all, I don't pretend to speak for Donald Trump on these foreign policy issues.
But I want you to imagine him as your president.
Well, I would expect that his team would be saying these are allies of ours. We need to recognize the strategic importance of this place and of Turkey and the role that they play in really protecting the European.
But I can feel another problem that he'd be thinking about. This is a president who's become more and more Islamic as he goes on. There's a huge Islamic issue in Turkey, Islamist issue. I'm just wondering, you know, for example, he said he doesn't want any Muslims to appear in this country. How good is he going to be with Muslims anywhere else?
First of all, that's not exactly what he said. What his position is, and he's clarified this in some speeches, is that if you are coming to the United States from an area that has a history of terrorism, you need to be vetted very carefully. And so there should be restrictions on geographic places associated with terrorism. And so it's not a religious test type ban.
Just very quickly, you're a former Homeland Security man. Building a wall against Mexican immigration, is that really a goer?
Well, this is obviously there's some things that I disagree with Donald Trump on. I'm supporting him, and I would hope to shape his view as to how we need to protect our borders. We want to make sure that we're open for commerce and trade, and our allies and our friends. We want to continue that path.
Governor Hutchinson, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
I've been getting away with it.